in this camp, we found out that the last few psychers were actually murdered. Many more were actually targeted by whatever those blue-birded mutants were. As I talked to a few Skitari who mentioned there was another tech priest. He was with the last long-range patrol to go explore the ship. And if we wanted to talk to him, we would have to go there in person, because Vox communications weren't going through. I would prioritize myself with gathering a small crew to go out and find this 10, to examine the strange disc, and to come to a better idea of what this demonic creature was and what these mutants were, while Calzone would go to the astropathic choir and call for help. He did a little bit too well, though. Calzone sent an astral projection of himself to a young psyker who, after hearing his message, asked a man named Inquisitor Stormcloak if they were within reach of our system. If we didn't clear up this mess before they came, we were very likely to find a bolt pistol to our skull and a shallow grave before us. So no shit, a slightly heretical tech priest with a small armory of Xenos tech and pistols, and an astropath who hardly understood a single part of how the Imperium worked, stuck in the middle of a highly heretical situation. Meanwhile, the Inquisition was coming down our asses. Odds didn't look good. Usually, this would be the point where most logical people would say, you know, I like my job and my boss, but I like my head on my shoulders better. Let's just destroy all the heretical shit and pretend nothing happened. I mean, the Inquisition can't really shoot you if there's no evidence, right? Unfortunately, we're not most people. Most people don't work for rogue traders. We knew equally well that if we didn't explain to our rogue trader why his ship was not ready to fly yet, he would make quite sure that our heads would no longer be attached to our shoulders. With what few people we could trust, including our guard, Sergeant Billis, we made a plan. After finding out about the demon that had seemed to possess the staff, and finding out that whatever these mutant creatures that seemed to be inhabiting the ship were working with said demons, we knew that there was some sort of eldritch thing going on. Tink had already prepared for an excursion to find an expert on these creatures to help explain the strange obsidian disc that had been recovered along with the bird mutant that we had found. Something about him having served in several, how should I put it, more questionable Mechanicus circles, including at least one Inquisitor for a short amount of time. With the convoy ready, we geared up. We got into a Torax. 7 of our best guards joined us, including Sergeant Billis, along with a small escort of guardsmen and at least 1 or 2 tech adepts. Their job was to re-establish communications between our base and the small forward outpost we had by the ship. Between them should be a relay station, which they needed to repair. The Toraxes roared to life, and Tink slowly began to switch through the audio frequencies, listening for anything out of the ordinary. As the trucks moved down the dirt roads, we all had a feeling somebody was watching us. And when finally Sergeant Billis requested that Calzone should perhaps scan the area, it was acknowledged that there was at least a few sentient minds out there. We dropped off our small repair team and warned them about the monsters that could be lurking around, but as much as we would have liked to stay and help them, time was of the essence. By Calzone's predictions, we only had maybe 10 hours before the Inquisitor arrived. We gave them a few heavy weapons, and then parted ways, heading towards the outpost to find the experts on whatever strange tech we'd been uncovering from these bird creatures. Hours later, we finally reached the outpost. It was ramshackle, to say the least. Signs of battle scarred the outside. Bolt shells littered the ground, and corpses of the blue bird people, similar to the one we had found in the morgue earlier, possessed by a demon, were scattered around the base's outskirts, leaned over spikes and razor wire. Signaling to the inside, we were let in, and we realized just how dire the situation was for most of these soldiers. Of the original garrison of around 100, only about 26 remained, including 2 of the tech adepts. Thankfully, the one we were seeking was still there. He was strange, to say the least, even by Tink's standards. The entirety of his left arm seemed to be covered in what seemed to be carapace of some kind. Not the normal type of carapace that you see on guardsmen flak jackets, by the way. We're talking almost organic. Whatever it was, it seemed custom. And whatever backpack he was wearing, it was allowing him to float just a few inches off the ground. He introduced himself as 11. There was an odd moment when the two tech priests shook hands and sized each other up. It was almost as though we were both trying to figure out if the other was also a heretic of some kind. Or perhaps the other was there to replace them. When 11 asked why exactly Tink and Calzone had been sent over when no reinforcements like them were requested, we told him our reasoning. We understood that he was a specialist, and that we needed his expertise on a certain situation back at camp. He asked if it was about perhaps one of the creatures that we've been encountering. We could neither confirm or deny that, but I think he realized what we were talking about. And we suddenly heard what could only be described as a primitive war horn. Over the horizon and out of the jungle, we saw a small army, perhaps 100 to 200 of mutated blue bird creatures, carrying shields and swords. Primitive, but something told us that they were more than capable of cleaving us in two with a single blow. Besides the fact that they were lumbering 8-foot-tall bird people. Our guardsmen took our positions, and we began to put down fire. It wasn't too bad, ironically, but there was something off about the situation. Usually when a bunch of primitives start charging a position of, highly disciplined guardsmen and tech priests armed with bolt guns and high-powered and high rate of fire, las weapons, it's over pretty soon. Daka, going downrange, tends to put many holes in your enemy. Even if it's an orc, 3 gaping holes in the chest should be able to put something down. But for whatever reason, our shots didn't seem to hit. Well-aimed shots that should have gone straight through center mass seemed to just glance off of them. Not a single burn mark or any sign of damage. This became most evident, though, with the bolt gun that Tink had been carrying along with him. A few bursts of rounds would go down range and would be right on their mark, but would detonate just a few seconds before hitting their target. Whether these things realized it or not, they had a sort of psychic field around them. Psychers. Mind you, whatever these psychic fields they were using weren't invincible. After a few shots, we did manage to penetrate the field, but it was enough to get them into melee combat, and that was not pretty, to say the absolute least, as Billis soon found out when one of them cut his las gun in two, nearly cutting off his left arm. Tink was lucky enough to be able to get his power axe out to shatter whatever weapons they were using. Was it made of obsidian? The fighting was dirty, quick, and fast, with a few well-placed eldritch bolts from Calzone and a few last volleys of bolt gun ammunition. Those that were not in melee combat were finished off. Casualty numbers rose again, but thankfully with the new reinforcements that Calzone and I brought, it seemed that the outpost could be manned for a few more days, if the attack schedules followed as 11 predicted, which was around once in the morning and once in the evening. Tink then calmed in to the other crew that was setting up the Vox relay station out on the road, telling them that we'd be heading back within the next half an hour. No response. Shit. Those things were in the jungle too, and probably had just killed our friends. But what choice did we have? We only had now maybe 6-7 hours left before the Inquisition arrived, and it would be at least a 3-hour drive back. As much as we'd like to say in our nice, safe outpost, well guarded and well fortified as it is, we had to figure out what the hell was going on here, and preferably before the Inquisition arrived. Back into the Torresks we went. Now, with an extra tech priest in tow, the convoy began. The 3 of us, the lead truck ahead of us, and Billis, Tink, 11, and Calzone in the middle truck. We kept ourselves at a decent pace, and for the first hour or so, nothing happened. Half-hour later, we passed what was left of the wreckage of the relay station. Arrows the size of spears were through one of the cogboys' chests. We stopped to ogle it for a second, only then to hear a scream as the lead vehicle lost its driver. A blue bird creature had just shot through bulletproof glass a primitive spear-like arrow, similar to the one that went through the cogboy's chest. So shit, we floored it. The people in the first car were dead probably already. Not really our problem, if that's the case. These creatures, whatever they are, were on foot. There's no way that they could keep up with two very much state-of-the-art vehicles made by the finest Imperium Forge Worlds. And, you know, our prediction was right for a while, until we saw one basically jump a good 30 feet and land in the Taurox behind us. Shit. As we saw and heard the screams from the last Taurox behind us, we realized just how fucked we were. We thought that it couldn't get worse. We thought that, you know, a bunch of bird people with superhuman strength and apparently latent psychic abilities was probably the worst things that you could get, especially when you're in basically nom-like situations. Except it can get worse, because as we soon found out, that they're capable of flying. You remember that disc thing, you know, circular with eldritch runes on it, that was floating, you know, maybe about 3 feet off the ground and was chained with adamantine in a cage? Yeah, turns out those things ride them. Surf them through the air. Think of a giant 8-foot bird person now riding one of these things with a bow that apparently can pierce straight through bulletproof glass. It's just a little bit terrifying when your driver gets shot and you have to take control of the vehicle from the back seat, driving through the cameras installed inside of the passenger department. Meanwhile, other ones are jumping in behind you. All you can do is hear, because you're plugged into the vehicle. Saying that the situation was terrifying didn't really sum it up very well. In fact, it was so terrifying that we might have done something kind of sort of stupid. We had about a small swarm of 20 of them following us, and 3 of them in the air with those weird glass-piercing bows of theirs. And now we thought would be a great time to maybe get them with an artillery strike, to, you know, get them off our ass. So, calling in our position to the nearest artillery battery by our old fortress, we prayed to God that, you know, maybe we'd be out of the splash zone. What we didn't count on was just how fast that artillery battery was able to lock onto our position, or as I should say, our old position, and fire. Have you ever heard guard level artillery fire? I'm not talking about some 88mm flak, I'm talking about 200mm howitzers with earthshaker rounds. We were firm believers that there was no such thing as overkill, but maybe this one time it was a bit much. As the rounds sunk home, the Taurox we were driving in was flipped end over end, at least 3 times. It was a spectacular sight from the outside, but on the inside, it took us a few moments to get our consciousness back, as we were all dazed, falling out of our vehicle. There was this faint smell of burnt chicken and feathers in the air, and we all had to remember why we were there again. Fuck. Figure the situation out. Right. Tink cracked his back, standing up again. No, that can't be, he said, readjusting his servo eyes, and then realizing that one of those bird creatures was standing in front of him, still alive. There was a split-second reaction that made him want to grab his bolt pistol and just put a hole straight through its skull. But no, the mad little priest decided to grab the thing with his mechadendrites. And it was an interesting fight, to say the least. Both tech priest and bird person started sprawling on the ground, and when Billis finally got hold of his last gun and tried to shoot them, a bullet bounced off of Tink's skull. But with a quick headbutt, the bird became unconscious. And with a delightful grin on his face, Tink decided to triumphantly walk back to camp, with the bird person in tow. When questioned by Calzone why he was bringing the horrible creature with him, the creature that had, by the way, just tried murdering us, Tink simply smiled and said it was time to get some answers. And you, Mr. Psyker, are gonna get them for me. In retrospect, this was probably where everything went to shit. Grabbing 11, Calzone, our sergeant, and what few survivors from the attack remained, we marched the rest of the way back to the old base, with the bird person in tow, still screeching every so often, but soon taken out of his misery with a quick bash to the skull. When we finally managed to get within a mile radius, we were picked up by a small squad, and they gave us a heads up that a ship had just de-warped. A big one, Inquisition. And now we're demanding answers. Tink simply told them to stall for time, handed off the creature to one of the guardsmen, and told them to put it into the holding cell C. You know, the one where we originally had the dead version of that. 11 was then sent off to check out the strange floating obsidian disc, while Calzone and Tink began to plan. The idea was that we would grab whatever sedatives we could get, and then try to put the creature into a weird sleep, and maybe it spoke Gothic and we could get answers out of it. If that didn't work, then, well, we'd just have Calzone psych whatever memories out of its skull. After a bit of panicking, realizing that we didn't have such sedatives on base, and having to scrounge around with the less reputable members of the camp, we finally got to cell C, where our little blue friend was waiting. We had 3 syringes of what essentially amounted to truth serum. The bird person was strapped to the table and was constantly cursing us, saying that we were worshippers of the false emperor and that we were traitors and blah, 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 I'm a mutant. The first syringe came out, Tink got the first strike, plunging the syringe into the thing's neck, and well, let's just say it had minimal effect. The bird, of course, felt it, screeching and howling as the needle did its work, but it was less than desirable. Looking at Calzone, he plunged in the next syringe into the thing's heart, which still didn't work. Okay, little concerning, seeing that's probably enough to trank a horse. We both looked to each other, looked at the last syringe, and said fuck it, plunging the syringe into its dick. That was more for shits and giggles, to be honest. Honestly, we didn't know what to do. We had already put it into its neck, into its heart. I mean, where else can you put a syringe that's going to make a difference? Needless to say, it was still awake, and probably just more pissed off than anything. Drugs were a no-go. We could have bashed its skull in, but that would probably destroy what we needed to know. And well, if Calzone was going to do some psyching work, he said that he was going to need this creature to be unconscious. With a tender mechadendrite, Tink reached out and cupped its jewels and slowly began to squeeze. I did say this is where things were going wrong, right? Several strength checks later, with a slightly bruised pride and slightly disgusted self and a mechadendrite hand that would probably have to be removed after this mission, Calzone began to read whatever this creature's mind to figure out what exactly was going on. Looking back, it was probably best we didn't know. Calzone saw a planet with pyramids and obelisks reaching to the skies. Fire rained from above, and the sounds of the wolfen raged throughout the streets. There was panic and voices, something about having to make things right. Space Marines clad in crimson ran through the streets and fought against Space Marines clad in blue and white. There was a ship that tried to break a blockade, and then a laughter of a creature from far beyond, and a single thought permeated the creature's mind. Kill the wolf, Magnus stands. Tink might have not been well versed in the study of chaos and the more heretical side of the Imperium back in the Horus Heresy, but he did know the name Magnus, and the event that was being portrayed before him. Prospero burning by the wolf's hand. But I think what really put the final pieces in place for Tink was when he looked to the rags that were tied around the waist of these creatures. Leftover pieces of uniforms with the emblem of the Thousand Suns. It was faint, hard to see, and in all honesty, can't blame anybody for not noticing earlier. But what those things were the ex-crew of an old ship that had escaped Prospero. And the ship we were digging out belonged to the Thousand Suns. Relaying this to Calzone, a single word came across both our lips. Fuck. As both of us realized just how screwed we were. If the Inquisition found out, the commander of the base raised an interesting question. If what you're saying is true, and that this is something to do with a long-lost Space Marine Legion that went rogue during the Horus Heresy, is it really safe for your tech priest friend to be working on a obsidian disc that probably is some form of psychic heresy? The speed of which Tink and Calzone left the room to go check on 11 was only matched by the speed of which the commander put a pistol round through the skull of this creature. Tink then ordered that thing to be burned as soon as possible, and then began to run to the containment cell where the disc had been found. Running into the room, Tink found nothing quite wrong. The guardsmen and the commander of the base were beginning to surround the location. 11 simply was staring at the disc, now unchained, going through his data slate. You knew what this was all along, didn't you? Tink said, realizing that 11 had never been surprised when the situation had been described to him. No, he said, you know what this was all along. I've been inside the ship, he said, and I know that there is far more to be found. He turned to Tink. We'll all burn on this planet, he said with a chuckle, or as much of a chuckle that his cybernetic vocals could muster, but I'll make sure you all burn first. And with a split second, he released the disc from its chains, letting it outside of its bars. It began to spin, and there was a slight feeling of bowel-loosening dread that filled everyone. Psychic phenomenons began to flood the room, blood dripping from the ceiling, and within seconds, guardsmen turned on each other, several las rounds going through Tink and Calzone's stomach. 11 tried to flee from the room, only to find that he didn't have a leg anymore. As a power axe sliced through, he sneered, drew his pistol, and shot Tink in the stomach again. Tink reeled, falling to the ground, only to have Calzone jump on 11 again, stab him through the stomach. Tink crawled over and tried to grab what few data cores were left on him. If he had indeed been in the ship, then there had to be something of worth in there, even if it was heretical. Guardsmen all around began to fire, and more shots hit Tink and Calzone. Trading fire, Tink finally said fuck it, letting loose with a flamethrower as everything began to burn, the disc still spinning in the middle of the air. There was an odd feeling of spiders creeping up their backs as they looked at the disc as it rose higher and higher. More guardsmen tried to come in to figure out what the commotion was, and Tink did scream to tell them to look away and move if they valued their lives. Only 2 actually listened, and when they saw the disc spinning faster, they soon fell and became corrupted. With that, Tink and Calzone had one final look, as they knew whatever this thing was, it couldn't be allowed to live, until Calzone finally let loose with his psychic ability, trying to find the tears and cracks in whatever this thing was. There was a sickening noise as the thing began to crack. Tink let loose with a plasma bolt from his cutter and hit it with his axe. There was a blinding flash, shrapnel flew everywhere, and a distinct taste of the color purple. Then smoke filled their nostrils. Tink and Calzone looked at each other. There was at least a dozen dead scattered around. A commissar walked in, and a bolt pistol fired off, finishing off 11, who was trying to crawl out of the room. He then pulled the pistol on the 2 of us, asking if we had been corrupted. Honestly, we were too exhausted to argue with him, too wounded as well, and the only reply we were able to give was, if we were, we'd probably have already tried to kill you. He shrugged and walked out of the burning tent. Tink then pulled off his face mask and pulled what looked to be a doobie about the size of a tampon, lit it, took a very long draft, and passed it along to Calzone. This was going to be a very, very long adventure, and the Inquisition had just arrived. Alright folks, that's where the end of the first arc comes in, and the next part, we're going to be getting some new characters. Stop focusing on Tink and Calzone for a bit. If you like this story, please like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz. And please, I want to hear your 40k stories down in the comment section down below. If you want more of this, please let me know, and I'll try to get out the next bit of content as soon as I can. For now, have a great day, And I want to see you in the next episode. See ya.